Hi everyone, and welcome to Campus Safety's podcast series. My name is Zach Wynn. I'm Campus Safety's web editor, and today we're going to do a podcast I'm very excited about on ransomware. For those of you who don't know, ransomware is a type of malware that commonly infiltrates computer systems through an email and then restricts access to the infected system, making the user pay a fee to the hacker to kind of restore access. So it kind of holds the system hostage for ransom. It's a relatively new, well, it's not relatively new, but it's new in the safety and educational sectors particularly. So today we've brought in Brian Contos. He is a fellow with the Institute of Critical Infrastructure Technology, also known as ICIT, and he's the Chief Security Strategist for SecureOnX. He's an expert in behavioral analytics, among other technologies. So excited to have you on today, Brian.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Zach.
Yeah, so I guess we want to start by talking about, because we have seen this kind of spike in recent weeks even in hospitals, can you talk about how vulnerable you really think hospitals are and how easy it is to get into their networks?
Yeah, absolutely, Zach. Hospitals, like financial services, have a lot of sensitive data. And that sensitive data can be targeted by bad guys for uses like fraud, blackmail. We've seen cases where celebrities have had their files or executives have had their files sold to tabloids and things like that. And we also see snooping, right? We see people that work for hospitals, administrators or other employees that they're looking at their friends, their family, their coworkers. The real issue, the real rub when it comes to healthcare data and very sensitive healthcare information is you can terminate a credit card account. You can change your bank account. The money will probably get reimbursed. You might have a few headaches for a couple months dealing with it, but healthcare information, once it's out there, that's kind of fixed.
Yeah.
So that's why there's still regulatory mandates out there. There's a lot of security concerns around it. Well, the problem is healthcare providers, they have all this traditional IT stuff that you'd see like in financial services or retail or any other company.
Yep.
They also have specialized equipment like EHS, electronic healthcare systems. And they've got X-ray systems and insulin pumps and heart monitors. They're all connected. And by the way, those items, they've all been hacked before. We've shown that those things can be compromised. Mm-hmm. So you've got this specialized equipment, which is a lot like critical infrastructure. You've got highly sensitive data, which is a lot like financial services. But the rub is you generally have a really, really small staff compared to like healthcare payers or pharmaceuticals or a lot of industries. So if you ask me, are healthcare providers vulnerable and a target? You bet. It's really this perfect storm.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've seen kind of different hospitals respond to ransomware differently. One in particular case, one of the first ones that I know Campus Safety reported on, was at Hollywood Presbyterian, and it was looking at basically the hacker had demanded a large sum of money, and they ended up, I guess, kind of compromising with him and paying a ransom after the FBI kind of concluded that was probably one of the better ways to go, although the FBI did say, or refused to say rather, whether or not they advised the hospital to pay. But what do you think kind of the decision to pay could mean for the future of ransomware in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, so for Hollywood Presbyterian and others, and anybody that has to pay, it's very easy being in the security industry for me to say, I'm very cavalier about my statement and you should never pay and really take a very binary approach. Unfortunately, that's not the real world. The truth is that most organizations and individuals, when they get compromised by ransomware, because it does attack individuals as well, it's a very opportunistic attack, they might not necessarily have the right backups in place. They don't have a good recovery program that can help them, just say, let's just wipe that drive and let's start afresh. That's actually relatively common. So they have to pay. Even though they know that, look, I'm paying this guy or this person, this organization, I don't even know if they're going to give me the keys so I can decrypt it. But I have to take a chance, and maybe it's going to a crime organization, or maybe it's even going to a terrorist group. I don't know. So all these things go through their head. But at the other side, I don't have my backups, and I have to get these systems back online. And a lot of people start thinking about, well, they pay $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000. If it's an individual, maybe they pay a few $100s to decrypt these systems. But there's also the PR issues. There's the legal fees. There's the brand image. There's the fact that they might lose patient trust. So all these things get rolled into it. So these ransomware attacks are really problematic way beyond just a system or group of systems getting encrypted and losing a bit of money to pay to potentially get that decryption key.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of talked about the backups and how important they are to have kind of backups in your system. What other network security infrastructure is typically in place in hospitals?
It's what's interesting about hospitals, and actually if you say what's typical for a bank or what's typical for a retailer, they're going to have general solutions in place. They're going to have email, they're going to have people browsing webs, they're going to have certain databases. Hospitals will have very specific devices as well that are relevant to their industry, just like every vertical has that. But the thing about it isn't really what they have that's any different than anybody else. It's how secure are those devices that they have. Okay, I've got email, but do I have gateway controls? Do I have endpoint controls to ensure that if malicious software, malware does come across, or ransomware, that it can be detected? If I have web gateways, am I proxying that information? Am I able to limit the types of sites that my users are going to perhaps limit them from going to known malicious or suspicious websites? So again, I don't think that these ransomware attacks, like the one that we saw in Presbyterian, were specifically targeting Presbyterian or even targeting just healthcare. I think they were scanning for open systems that were potentially vulnerable. And they were going after these systems via the standard routes, which is I'm going to send you an email, I'm going to send you an IM, I'm going to send you something and try to get you to click on a link, or you go to a website. These are generally the forms that the mechanisms that the bad guys will use to infect somebody with ransomware.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and yeah, kind of looking at how the network security infrastructure at hospitals compares to K through 12 school districts and universities, because we have seen attacks on them as well. Do you think universities and districts are any better prepared for ransomware attacks?
I put them in a pretty similar category with healthcare providers, especially K through 12. Universities may be a little bit more secure. It really comes down to having preparedness and having incident response programs and remediation processes that aren't just planned on paper but practiced. Again, healthcare providers in K through 12, they typically lack a large enough staff to do those types of more strategic things, and they're really focusing on day-to-day firefighting, a little bit more tactical. Mm-hmm. Universities, on the other hand, sometimes they have a little bit of a larger staff, and they have the ability to do that, but they have a very transient group of administrators. A lot of them graduate and they leave, and they might have a base of people that are actually employed by the university, but they also leverage students. So because of that, that can be challenging as well, even though they have more people. So I would say that across the board, those are organizations that depend heavily on email, depend heavily on web, which almost every industry does, but they might not have the people and the processes and the time to put in those systems to ensure they're as secure as possible in the face of these emerging ransomware type attacks.
Yeah. Okay, and I know ICIT recently came out with a report, and other organizations have as well, kind of seeing 2016 as the year that ransomware really comes into play a lot more often in institutions. So what advice would you give to hospitals and schools who are trying to protect against ransomware attacks?
Yeah, I would say you definitely want to talk about awareness with your employees, and that's the easy thing to say, and everybody that talks about security talks about awareness. It is valuable. I think it adds some value, but to be very honest, most people, they want to think the best of others. So when somebody sends them a link through whatever mechanism or they're on a website, most individuals won't think twice about, let me click on this, or let me see this video or this photo or this attachment. And that really is what helps drive this. Because if we think of ransomware, it's really a volume-based attack. Depending on what statistics you look at, anywhere from a 0.5% to maybe 5% of people will actually pay. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is when it's going out to potentially millions and millions of targets. So it can be quite lucrative. It's very much anonymous in most cases, and it's easy. It's a relatively easy attack. So awareness is big, but I really think we need to step it up a little bit. There's a lot of preventative controls out there. The traditional blacklisting solutions just don't scale. They haven't scaled for a long time. The security industry knows that. The general industries know that as well. And we're seeing a lot of people these days focusing on solutions like what Securonics does and other vendors, which is behavioral analytics, anomaly detection. And from a very simplistic perspective, it's basically saying, this is what normal looks like on my network. This is normal for my users, for their email gateways, for their web access processes on systems. And when I see a deviation of that, I start seeing a new process, something that's very rare. Or if I see unusual beaconing activity coming out of my network, like it's been infected by malware, or I see a user's email address that's doing something that doesn't look like that user or what that user's peers do, this is something that's an anomaly. And while it's not purely from a preventative perspective, it lends itself to rapid threat window reduction, and that's the time between you detect an event and you can actually remediate it. And that detection and that response is really what's key in ransomware, because you want to detect it quickly, you want to stop it from spreading horizontally, and hopefully if you have the backup plans and other processes in place, you just take it offline, you wipe the system, you restore it from a known good backup, and you're back in business, so you don't have to pay these criminals.
Yeah. And one of the other things the report team mentioned, I know staff training is important too, one of the other things that your report mentioned was incident response teams. And so I'm kind of wondering how you would suggest a school or hospital go about developing one of those.
Yeah, when I see incident response teams that work, it's very easy for organizations to say, well, we'll get 3 or 4 IT security folks. Certainly you want them involved, but there needs to be an executive leader, and maybe that's the CEO, but maybe that's the chief risk officer or the chief financial officer, legal, what have you. There needs to be somebody involved from PR. There needs to be somebody involved from multiple groups, multiple key categories. And you get these groups together, and it's best to start off doing like a desktop war room scenario where you're not actually physically going out and doing anything, but you're theorizing. Well, what if these systems got impacted, and these are tied to actual patient care? They're far more critical than these systems that might take us offline, but we can still continue to operate. Maybe we have to go back to a pad of paper and pencil like they did at Presbyterian Hospital. But by doing these whiteboard or tabletop exercises, that's a great foundation to sort of figure out who needs to be on our team. Let's identify what our critical assets are, and let's put in place a program to help mitigate threats if something does occur. And then you take it to the next step, which is actually, let's run through a practice. Let's assume a system did go down. Let's go ahead and run through it physically, what we would do. And then you start finding things out like, well, boy, we got to get into this room, but we don't have anybody from facilities in our group that can get us into this room. Or we need to be able to take this device offline, but in order for us to do this, we need approval from this person in this group. So there's all these real-life issues that you actually figure out. Putting that tabletop sort of work in progress together, along with sort of the real-world exercises, really yields a nice, robust incident response program. And that's something that, as long as you have executive sponsorship, you can do, in a matter of a few days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going back to kind of when you realize there's an anomaly, or you realize you may have been infiltrated your system, are there any major mistakes that institutions make in those really important first few hours that they realize they need to do something?
Yeah, the biggest mistake is, of course, lack of preparation. They don't understand what their exposure is. Okay, this system was locked. Well, what's on that system? Is there critical data? Does it help run any critical processes? Do we have backups that we can move on this? Is this system segregated in a way that we can actually just disconnect it right now? Or does it have to stay online regardless? Potentially the malware can start moving laterally. Because just because you have ransomware on your device doesn't mean that you don't have other bits of malware that are doing other malicious things as well. The same vulnerabilities that the ransomware is going to try to compromise, a unpatched application, your operating system is vulnerable, some default usernames and passwords, things of this nature. Other malware could be using as well and moving laterally. And also, do you have a tested support plan and process? Having great technology is great. Having behavioral analytics and having solutions that can detect new unknown processes, or my patches are out of date, or I need to load a new set of blockers for my gateway. These are all important things, but the technology should augment those processes. So I guess the biggest thing is, when you think about it, you need to have solutions in place that can prevent where you can. What you can't prevent, you can detect what gets by, but you have to have a rapid response program in place. And when it comes to ransomware, probably the three biggest things are make sure you have backups, make sure you have a plan, and make sure you practice that plan. Because you don't want to be, building the plane while you're flying it when it comes to ransomware. You'll waste so many resources and so much time. You're not sure who the person is that can make this decision. Who does make the decision if you're supposed to pay or not? When do you tell PR? When it's a hospital that has, I think the number is like over 500 people, you actually have to report these types of breaches to the government as well. So who's in charge of that? So there's a lot of technical and non-technical and process things that you really have to plan for. And the biggest problem that I see is people do not plan for it, and then when it happens, they just don't know what to do. So the problem becomes much worse, and it lasts much longer.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some institutions get caught with their pants down, so to speak, and when they get attacked by ransomware. So it is something that people need to start focusing more on and putting more of an emphasis on. And so do you think, I guess I'm wondering how prevalent you see ransomware becoming in the healthcare, security industries, and then just in businesses in America in general?
I see it becoming much more common. I mean, if we go back and we look at the history of ransomware, I guess arguably you could say the first ransomware came out in the late 1980s. I think it was around 1989. And this was a PC Cyborg, I believe is what it was called. And it actually just encrypted the file names and said, you have some expired software on your system. You have to go ahead and send me some money. But that was sort of a little one-off. But, right around 2009, 2010, we started seeing a lot coming out of Russia and Eastern Europe. CryptoLocker got really popular in 2013. So we've definitely seen this evolution. They become more mature. A lot of these ransomware, these gangs are using ransomware. They actually are giving people the keys, because if people do a quick search and they find out, if you pay for this, you never get the key anyway, so why pay? So they actually try to do that in many cases. But again, only about 0.5% to 5% still actually pay individuals and organizations. So you're going to start seeing wide swaths of attacks across individuals, across organizations. I don't necessarily think they're going to be targeted. I think they're going to be opportunistic. I think they're going to be looking for organizations that might be more insecure or might not have a large security staff. And K through 12, healthcare providers, many retailers, universities, these all fall into that group. They might not have the more robust controls that you'd expect to see, like at a financial institution or a healthcare payer or a pharmaceutical, that have arguably equally sensitive data, but they have more advanced processes and maybe a larger investment in technologies to protect that infrastructure. So are we going to see more? Yes. Are we going to see more targeting these verticals that might not be as secure? Absolutely, because there's going to be a higher probability of vulnerabilities within those verticals.
Yeah, that's definitely the impression I get too, and just looking at 2016 so far, it's definitely, the trend is scaling upward, so definitely a worrying thing. I'm wondering, I know one of the things that a lot of network security experts suggest you do, one of the first things when you realize you might be the victim of ransomware is to contact the authorities. And just because of the nature of ransomware, that usually leads to the FBI becoming involved, because they just have the resources necessary compared to a local police department, say. So do you think that the FBI and other federal organizations that are usually called in to deal with this stuff have a long-term plan for dealing with ransomware?
I think they're working hard to try to figure it out. This is, again, we talked about the evolution that has been happening for, since arguably '89, but certainly the mid-2000s. This is something that's matured, but it's accelerated so quickly in the last couple of years that while the FBI is trying to help out and they're making breach reporting become common again for if you have a hospital with 500 or more people. So because of that, they understand the processes and what has to be done. But they don't have the ability to go in there and decrypt these. There's not a lot that can be done. And because it uses Bitcoin or some other non-sovereign currency, there's limited organizations that will get involved in sort of tracking this. It's very hard to track Bitcoin and things of that nature. And generally, FBI and other organizations will try to track things to follow the money. It's harder to do that in these cases. So the bad guys know that, and they know there's a window of opportunity right now, which is why they're executing on it so aggressively, while the authorities and the legal system as well tries to kind of catch up and figure out, what do we do? How do we do this? How do we address this? And there are great technologies out there to help sort of prevent and detect and respond to these things, but nothing's 100%. So right now it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, and I would probably argue that the bad guys are winning the ransomware battle, but the good guys are really trying to step up the game quickly.
Yeah, and I think everybody's kind of working to maintain more robust network systems. So it's something. It's a work in progress for sure. And I'm wondering, because it does seem like the bad guys have kind of been getting away with this for a while. If you're aware of incidents where somebody actually has been caught and prosecuted for using ransomware.
Yeah, arrested certainly. Actually, found guilty of attacking an organization. Nothing really rings the bell there. I know in 2010 there was some Russian authorities that actually arrested some individuals tied to Winlock, which is a type of ransomware. It's actually a non-encrypting type of ransomware. There's lots of flavors. And I remember, I think it was 2014, there was some Dutch police that arrested a couple folks associated with CoinVault. Now, whether or not they were found guilty or found guilty specifically for attacking a specific organization, I don't know. I don't know the details of that, but just those two sporadic examples, it's relatively rare, and which is what makes ransomware so appealing to criminals and potentially terrorist organizations or whoever wants to leverage it, because it is easy, it is anonymous, and some people won't pay, but some people will. So it's a nice revenue stream for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and I always like to ask if there's anything that you want to add you think our listeners should know.
Yeah, I just think, if you're looking at this from a technology perspective, certainly that's a portion, but we talked about, processes and people a moment ago. But, there was this old approach to security over the last, maybe 20 years where it was about let's build these massive walls and we'll have a firewall and we'll have antivirus and intrusion prevention systems, and those are great and they're still needed and they're still necessary. Unfortunately, with the nature of ransomware, every time they implement this version of malware, it can't be detected in most cases by most anti-malware solutions. If they're signature-based, they simply won't detect that ransomware because they're changing every time they go through. So instead of this binary approach to security, if I see X, do Y, which doesn't work anymore, we're more about curves now in the security industry. It's more about anomaly detection, predictive analytics, behavioral analytics, these types of solutions that can baseline and then look for anomalies, look for deviations, look for peer outliers. All this, machine learning and different types of more advanced mathematics that are leveraged, whether it's on the gateway, whether it's on the endpoint, whether it's solutions that ingest data from multiple other solutions, like Securonics does, for example, pulling from SIMs or hundreds of other products, or pulling from big data. It's having these behavioral analytics applied at different places within your organization so that you can really get a leg up on this ransomware, no matter what it is or no matter what the next threat is, because you're looking for anomalies. And anomalies is the new sort of gold standard for how to quickly detect and respond to these threats, as opposed to simply saying, here's a list of bad things today, and tomorrow here's a list that's 20 times bigger, and on and on and on. It just doesn't scale anymore, and we have to adapt. And behavioral analytics is one approach to this that seems to be working very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I want to end by really encouraging our readers to check out ICIT's recent report on ransomware. It's got some really valuable information. We did write a summary of it on campussafety.com that you can check out. Otherwise, it's 40 pages, pretty manageable. I think it's definitely worth the read. And of course, I want to thank you, Brian, for this talk. I think this was a really insightful talk.
Great. It was a pleasure, Zach. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone listening at home or work. We hope this helped, and definitely stay tuned for more podcasts in coming weeks.